Sonic's music is even better when it sounds sweet to your ears. It's a very important aspect of production and probably one of the hardest to master. It took me 2 years before I could play a track in a club that sounded decent. And yeah, basically, it's still like an ever ongoing process, but hopefully I can shed some light on things today. First thing I'm going to show you in this particular project is turning things down in order to have more sound space, basically. So at the moment, if we look on our master channel here, I'm pretty much pushing the red, basically, like that's as loud as it can go. So it's very good practice to start at like -7 or like -10 decibels on every track that you've got. And basically the reason for that is if you find like you are having trouble pushing loudness out of your track, or that you're having trouble getting, you know, say everything's turned up really loud and you want something to sing out over the top of everything else, but there isn't enough space in your mix, it's because everything is too loud. So yeah, basically it's a matter of taking everything in the track and turning it down by whatever you want. Best time to do this is before you start automating tracks, because say I have some track automation on one of these faders, then turning it down is a bit more of a pain because it's automated and it doesn't like that. So I've just made everything a hell of a lot quieter. I've got this limiter on the master here. It's just the Ableton limiter, and I'm going to turn that limiter up by 7 decibels. So you'll see here, I'm back to where I was 2 seconds ago. So everything is still loud, you know, but if I want to add, you know, a big vocal over the top of this, or I want to add something like that, I'm going to need more space in the sound space, and the way that I can do that is to just turn this knob down, basically. So yeah, so everything is turned down in the project, but so that I can still hear what I'm doing and so everything feels loud, I've still got that turned up, basically. So that's, yeah, just turning down to turn up. As far as the stereo field goes, a big way to sort of get fullness in your track and get things to sound kind of just fuller in general is to pan things and basically have things sitting to the side. If you think about like a spectrum analyzer or like a field analyzer, it's kind of like a protractor, like a semicircle, basically. And 90% of the sound that you use in your project sits in the middle of this semicircle, and you have all this space off to the side. So yeah, a few things I just wanted to show you quickly as far as Ableton goes. The fact that not many people seem to realize is that the Ableton EQ, you can actually you can EQ the left and the right channels separately. So see here, so you can take like this one, for example. So the first thing to do to kind of get a bit of variation in your stereo field is to actually EQ your left and your right channels differently on different channels. Now the effect is very subtle when just used by itself, but when used over a whole track, it just it makes things just a bit more exciting. What you basically want to aim for is just having a bit more sort of variation between what's coming out of the left speaker and the right speaker. If you listen to bands like Air, you know, a lot of bands out there actually, you'll notice that they'll have a lot of parts, like a piano that's just coming out of one speaker, you know, and that's something you don't hear enough in dance music. So yeah, I would encourage people to kind of use, you know, panning and that kind of thing, you know, and to make a bit of variation. There's a stereo separation, which is, I've got to say, is not particularly good in Ableton Live. If you use Logic, definitely use the sample delay. I'm sure any Logic users probably do. It's basically just like a way to make one side come out of the speaker, you know, a few milliseconds or 30 milliseconds or whatever later than the other, and that basically creates a widening effect. You can do the same sort of thing in Ableton to an extent by clicking on these. Here, it's a simple delay with the parameters set to time, the wet dry set to 100%, so that basically you have one side happening later than the other. So hopefully that effect will come through on these speakers. Let's give it a go. So it just creates a bit of like a discrepancy for your ears, that kind of thing. So basically, when you think about these stems, if you actually think about where in the stereo field the stems are sitting as well. So for example, a good way of doing things is to have, for example, the pads in your track sitting quite wide in the mix. So for example, I've muted out that ostinato for the time being so I can focus on the other sounds. Compression settings. So a couple of tricks I want to show you here with your drum track, which I think is really cool. In Ableton, you can obviously group all these different sections together. So I usually have a drum group. And something that you will hear in most kind of house records out there, and in fact most records in general, is some kind of pretty fierce compression on the overall drum track. So once everything is together like that, and sometimes people do the kick drum as a separate stem, and then they do the drum track by itself, and they compress those separately. Sometimes people will have the kick and the drums and the bass all squished together in one compressor as the groove. A lot of older style house tracks are like that. A compressor I really recommend, if I have it installed, yes I do, is the Glue by Cytomic. Really, really good compressor, this one. I would recommend it not only for your drum room. I'll give you an example of how this works here. So here's our drum track. I'd probably use something like that. You can see there it's bottoming out pretty hard because my drum track is already pretty loud. What's cool with the Cytomic one is I have a dry wet as well, so I can push it a little bit hard. And what this serves to do is basically squish all of those different sounds that sit in that stem together. So yeah, if you can think of someone like, say, for example, house producer Eric Prydz, his kind of mixing style is actually getting everything into these kind of sections and then compressing them individually. So something I just want to show you, that Glue aside, something that I learned that I never really realized until just a little while ago is that you can be quite you can be quite fierce with your compression settings as long as you know where to do it. One thing is the ratio. You'll find that you can have ratios on your drums, anywhere up to even 10 kind of thing, and the difference can be really, really big. If you think about how that sounds. So what it's done is it's brought the dynamic range of all those different parts that are playing together, and basically, say you've got a hat, because the hat's the only thing taking up the sound space, it really sticks out when it's playing. When the kick drum comes in, it brings the level of everything else down and so forth, and basically you have all these parts that are sitting at different heights in the mix, and it basically kind of squishes them together, which is the point of compression, and as long as you don't overdo it, it sounds really cool. So yeah, on your overall mix, I'm just going to show this quickly as well. I have this setting, the Glue 2, in here, which I use on most anything, and it sounds pretty cool. So. That's basically just a loudness thing. So what you're basically doing is just pushing everything up in the mix so that everything that's representing in the track is being represented, and isn't being sort of pushed aside. But yeah, you have to be very, very careful with compression, because if you push it too hard, it can ruin the whole mix, and then it stops DJs from playing your tracks because they go to play it out, and it sounds pushed too hard, and then when it's played at a big festival or whatever, it's then pushed through like another big chain of compressors and limiters, and it can basically ruin the sound.